Hey, Clemson family, it's almost time to visit Touchdown Jesus again as DJ Uiagalelei and the Tigers head to South Bend this weekend.
I'm Daniel Shirley. We're also going to break down our grades for the Clemson position groups one by one.
And we've got Matt Murschel on from the Orlando Sentinel to help us preview Notre Dame. I'm Bill Zimmerman. Welcome to episode 38 of the Reign Supreme Alway podcast. You can catch all our episodes at our homepage, clemsonkickoff.com. You can also follow us on Twitter, on Instagram. Both of those are at Clemson Kickoff. Thanks to those of you checking us out on youtube.com/Clemson Kickoff too. Give us a quick subscribe. Keep posted whenever we update. Follow us on the major podcast apps. We post usually twice each week. Well, let's get into the Notre Dame game. And as Daniel and I said the other day, it's the first game of the rest of Clemson's life. And we've got Matt Murschel here to preview them. I know he knows the Fighting Irish really well. Matt, thanks a lot for being with us.
No problem. Thanks for having me, guys.
So it sounds like Notre Dame's defense is very similar statistically to Clemson's. They are right next to each other in the total defense rankings. What can you tell us about how they're buttering their bread when the opponents have the ball?
Well, that's been the key to what their turnaround. They started out 0-2, and I think a lot of people wondered what was going on there. I think the big turnaround came from that defensive front. They've been able to kind of shut some teams down, going after teams, especially on the pass rush, doing a really good job of containing some teams. You saw what they did last week against Syracuse. They even really got to the point where they knocked out Garrett Schrader. I mean, it's at that level. So it's been a kind of a combined effort right now. They're not the most dynamic defense. I mean, listen, they don't get a lot of takeaways. I think they only got 3 interceptions this season. They've only had 5 takeaways total. So they're not one of those teams that's going to be opportunistic, but they are a team that's one of the physical teams up front. And I think that's really helped them out. They've contained the running game well against some of the last couple of opponents. And they're going to need to do that, over the next couple of weeks. They're going to do it, especially particularly this weekend against Clemson. So it's been a challenge a little bit. But, when you think about Marcus Freeman, Marcus Freeman's background is defense. You always knew their defense is going to be able to step up and make plays. They've been able to kind of grow and develop under Freeman's leadership.
Matt, who are a couple of the defensive leaders for Clemson fans to keep an eye on Saturday night?
Well, I think JT Bertrand, is the linebacker. He's the leading tackler on this team. He's a guy that definitely you expect to see a lot of moving around. Their linebackers are pretty solid. You look at the safety position. DJ Brown's been, a transfer that came in from, Navy at some point last year, and he's been a huge plus for them in the secondary. Their defensive line, like I said, isn't necessarily the greatest at times. And another safety I'm going to throw out there is Brandon Joseph. He was a transfer, came in from Northwestern. He's had a pretty good, solid start to the year. He's got 1 forced fumble, 1 interception, made a big play last week. I think he was the interception, the pick 6 that really kind of started the things off for Notre Dame. They've done a solid job of putting pressure on the quarterback, and they've done a good job of containing the run game. If they keep things in front of them, if they keep the offensive players in front of them well, they play well. But you've seen it at times where they've struggled. We saw it in the first couple of games of the season, and even against a team like Stanford, which was a game they inexplicably lost. They had moments where they gave up big plays. They're susceptible to that, but they have to find a way to kind of limit those things.
Matt, you mentioned Marcus Freeman. What about the turnaround for him? I mean, that says a lot about this coaching staff, I think, because they could have kind of folded after that tough start to the season.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, listen, there was a lot of anticipation, a lot of buzz going into this year with Notre Dame. I think they were ranked in the top 10 going in. People thought maybe this would be the year that they could make another run at a college football playoff appearance. And then you start at 0-2, and you have that really kind of disappointing loss to Marshall. And I think there were people starting to wonder, was Marcus Freeman really the right guy? Remember, let's not forget, he was an assistant coach, longtime assistant coach, had no head coaching experience, so to speak. People were wondering, should have Notre Dame gone out and hired an experienced coach, replace Brian Kelly? Should they have gone out and hired somebody who had some more years under his belt? But, Marcus Freeman had the support of the players. And I think that was a big choice on why he was named the head coach. And I think that's shown up this year, particularly after that 0-2 start. I think the team could have just quit on him. A lot of teams would have said, "Oh man, we're 0-2. We're struggling. We're not going to be in a playoff mix." And they could have started to mail it in. Instead, they played harder, and I think they played better, and you started to see that. And he actually admits he buckled down. He had to really kind of buckle down and all his assistant coaches had to work a little bit harder, especially on the awesome offensive side of the football. So it was definitely growing pains for him going through that. No one wants to start out 0-2 anywhere, but I think you've seen them kind of start to take that next level of maturity and move forward. I think a win over Syracuse this past weekend was a huge step for this program because, again, it just shows that there's a lot of fight going on right now.
Matt, did they change anything, or was it, like you said, just buckling down? Did they change anything scheme-wise after that slow start?
Well, I think one of the things that happened is, they lost their starting quarterback, and Drew Pine came in. He was the backup, and he came in. And Drew's not one of the most dynamic of playmakers that have been featured in an Irish offense for quite some time. He's okay, as a quarterback. But they really started to kind of focus on running the football, and I think this is where they started to get a little bit kind of comfortable in what they are as an identity. They're a physical running team. Their offensive line has been one of the strengths over the last 3 or 4 years for this Notre Dame program. And it was a young offensive line, and they mixed in some veterans. The offensive line really started to gel after that 0-2 start. They were running the football. They kind of mixed some things in here or there with Drew Pine. Obviously, Michael Mayer, who's one of the most explosive tight ends out there, was able to come out and make big plays, mixing some play action in there as well. And you just saw the difference. This was a more physical team. They kind of came into games with this idea they're going to run the football 30, 40 times. And a good example of this, guys, is last week against Syracuse. Pine only threw the ball 5 times in the second half. They were just dominating on the ground, and they're going to try to do the similar thing against Clemson this week. They want to run the football. They want to establish the run. They want to make sure that they can eat up clock. They want to allow their defense time to get settled in when they need to be. That's how they found their success. Occasionally, maybe you're missing in some play action or some different play, some passing formations, getting Mayer involved as well. So it wasn't so much of a schematic change as it was mainly just kind of establishing their identity early on, and that identity was a physical running team.
Matt, you mentioned Mayer. Just how good is he? Because he looks just dynamic.
He's incredible. I mean, you take a guy who, this is the thing about the evolution of the tight end position. Tight ends used to be guys who you wanted a guy who could block first and catch second. And now you've got this generation of tight ends. And Notre Dame has done a good job over the last 3 or 4 years of developing that position where they turn the tight end. It's almost like the legitimate number 1 receiver, where he's able to kind of come out. Not only can he block, but now he can go out and you can line him up at times at slot. You can line him up at the wide out position. And you can get him out there, and he can make those big plays. He can make a catch here or there, whether it's going across the middle of the field or shooting, an out route and trying to, get one-on-one with a defensive back and maybe able to take advantage of that. That's what makes him so so special. And he has physicality too, because he has that tight end kind of body. And it's really helped Notre Dame's offense out because, again, when you put him out there, he can block at times, but then he can take off and he can, make those big plays when you need to. That's what Notre Dame has done well the last 3 or 4 years, is really develop that tight end position. They're not the only school that's done that. Georgia's obviously done that as well. And there are other programs that have great tight ends. But, it's a special kind of position now that you can turn that tight end position to something more than just a blocking back.
What about the running backs? Dabo Swinney talked about them this week. Who are the guys they should keep an eye on, or Clemson fans should keep an eye on there?
Well, this has kind of been a 3-headed monster, for them lately. Audric Estime is as the leading rusher on this team. He's a guy that's had some strong showcases. Logan Diggs has also been used a lot well. Those 2 guys have kind of shared a load of rushes. And then Chris Tyree, who's a guy who's had some experience from last year, he's been mixed in as well. This is what I mean. They love to run the football, and they're going to mix in some guys. They're going to mix in some different packages and try to get some of those guys out there and give them opportunities to run the ball. This isn't a, last couple of years that had, a guy, maybe who's a 1,000-yard rusher every, year. I don't know if they'll get that this year. They'll probably have more of guys who are trying to get the opportunity to split those kind of carries and split the yardage as well.
Matt, when you look at this game, what's the key, do you think, for Clemson to be able to go to Notre Dame and pull out a win?
Well, I think they need to avoid, making mistakes. I mean, the turnovers really have kind of caught them off guard. To me, for Clemson, I mean, even in the game against Syracuse, it was early turnovers that kind of prevented them from doing some things. Then, once they can establish themselves and not turn the ball over, I think they have an opportunity to win there. I think they have to make Notre Dame one-dimensional defensively when it comes to, on the offensive side of the ball. They have to make Notre Dame one-dimensional, whether it's they'd like to see it become passing attack. Make Drew Pine really have to throw the football. I mean, he's not a great passer. He's not a guy who's going to come out there and throw for 400 yards. He's a guy that's just kind of he's a game manager, so to speak. So, you want to kind of put the onus on him to kind of pick up the slack of the offense. So if you could shut down their rushing attack, I think that spells good things for Clemson. And I think, on the defensive side of the football, you've got to mix some things up. They've got a strong defensive line. Notre Dame does. So if you're Clemson, you're gonna have to find a way to mix it up. You can obviously throw in a lot of Will Shipley. Make sure you got him out of the backfield, use him out as a slot at times. Find ways to kind of mix things up. And if things get a little bit hairy here or there, you turn the ball over. You got to make sure they can't turn those turnovers into touchdowns. You got to limit that and make that into field goals. So this isn't an explosive Notre Dame offense, so it's not like you're going to get into a track meet. I think one of the things that's got to be a little bit concerned is the weather going into this game. I'm hearing it's supposed to be cold, and it could be possibly cold and rainy. So those are not great conditions for a team like Clemson. Notre Dame, if you just want to pound the ball and run it, it's going to be great. So it might limit a little bit what both these teams can do.
Matt, what do you think about where Clemson is right now? It feels like the defense has been inconsistent, and then obviously everybody's talking about the quarterback situation after last week.
Yeah, I think injuries have kind of led to some of that defensive inconsistency. We obviously going into the season, we knew that, this was the defensive line was going to be one of the best in the country. But when you have injuries at that spot, they have had to move some guys here in and out there. That's kind of hurt them a little bit as well. I think a lot of the things that have kind of hurt Clemson at times are just self-inflicted, penalties, turnovers, things that you think to yourself, you're a good team wouldn't do that. You know what I mean? And it's not as if teams have come out outside of maybe the Syracuse game. It's not as if teams have come out and really kind of, thrown a haymaker at them, and really kind of caught them off guard. I know the Wake game was back and forth, and I know, it's just Clemson's had the opportunity to take control of those games, but then you make a mistake here or there, whether it's a penalty that turns a 3rd and 1 into 3rd and 10 or 3rd and 11, or a mistake, a turnover, interception like against in the Syracuse game. And those are the mistakes that kind of have hampered them a little bit. And it really honestly has put if it wasn't for a couple, interceptions by, Ugalele in that Syracuse game, we wouldn't even be talking about Cade Klubnik, to be honest with you. I don't think he would have even been a factor unless it was a blowout. So now you're seeing a little bit more of that thought process, whether they'll go to that. So I think a lot of this stuff is just self-inflicted.
Do you think where Clemson is in the playoff talk, we saw the first rankings last night, they were 4th. What did you think about that, and kind of where do you think is their ceiling for this season?
I think 4th was, that stunned me a little bit, and it's not no disrespect to Clemson. It's just, when you look at all the teams that are at the top, you kind of looked around. I think, listen, for Clemson, their problem really honestly moving forward is going to be the remainder of their schedule. Notre Dame, don't get me wrong, Notre Dame's a good opponent. And you look at some of the other teams on the, South Carolina has played well at the, but they've lost, they were ranked and they lost. They got to hope they play well. The biggest thing for Clemson right now is they've got to hope that the Coastal Division can once again someone pick up and take the baton and go forward with that. North Carolina is the only ranked team right now out of that side of the conference, and if they're not ranked, if they end up facing North Carolina in the conference championship, if they're not ranked when that happens, it's again, it's one of those things that could kind of be a detractor for Clemson. I think Clemson could go undefeated the rest of the way. I really do think that if they play like they've played through the first 8 games or through 7 games, I think they can do that. But they're looking around and they're looking at the SEC with Tennessee and Georgia and Alabama. And, you got to think, okay, what do we got to do to make sure that, we can keep our way above, 2 of those teams. And then you look at the Big Ten with Ohio State and Michigan and now TCU. So if you're Clemson, you got to just continue to do what you've been doing. And you almost got to do it in one of those ways where you got to do it impressively, because you can't kind of slip up at some point and not have a great win, because, the selection committee is going to be looking at that kind of stuff.
You talk about needing convincing wins from Clemson's camp. How can they keep Notre Dame from taking control of this game on the ground on the heels of struggling to stop the Florida State ground game, which surprised me, and then Syracuse doing as well as I'd expected on the ground?
Yeah, I think if you're Clemson, you've got to come out and score early. You got to build up a little bit of a lead. You've got to make Notre Dame come from behind. if you let them march down the field and put together 10, 12, 13, 14 play drives, and score, it's going to kind of throw some things off. It's going to give Notre Dame life. I think if you're Clemson, you got to come out and you got to get a couple touchdowns maybe early on, or jump out 10-0, 14-0, something like that, because this isn't a Notre Dame team, I think, that really honestly can sit back and try to get into a shooting match with teams. I think they want to run the football. They have a decent passing game, but not great. But if they can run the ball, I mean, they're going to try to do it as much as if they fall behind, Notre Dame's still going to run. Don't get me wrong. It's not like they're going to go away from the running game. But again, if you can stop it and limit them, and really kind of make them kind of be frustrated, which has happened in the past. I mean, I think you can take advantage of that. But if you let them jump out, or you let them get a 10-0 lead or something like that, then all of a sudden you're opening the door to let them kind of continue to run the football. And they've got to be better up front. I think because they've got some of their defensive linemen coming back off of injury. I know Xavier Thomas was kind of banged up, and Brian Breesy was banged up. If those guys are coming back healthy, I think they're going to do a pretty good job of making things kind of a little difficult for Notre Dame this weekend.
Is Pine effective moving the ball on the ground, or is it more a matter of mixing up the running backs against the targets in the air?
I think it's going to be mixing up the running backs, and I think they're going to they'll do some different things. Believe me. I mean, they're going to feel like they understand that they can't just go, this is force against force. You don't want to come out and just kind of ram your head against a brick wall, so to speak, when it comes to that defensive line. So I think Pine's going to have to find a way to kind of mix some things up a little bit. Now, I mean, he's not one of those guys, like I said, he's going to throw for 400 yards, but you could see some using the backs out of the backfield, mixing up some of the plays, maybe a little more motion just to kind of get things off kilter there a little bit. And this is home. One of the things I will say about this, Notre Dame used to be really, when you're at home in South Bend, it was tough to win in that place. But Notre Dame has struggled at home. You guys have seen that. I mean, they lost that game to Marshall at home. So for some reason this year, it's not a comfortable place for them. So it's going to be interesting to see how the crowd affects what's going on there. And like I mentioned, maybe the weather will be a factor as well.
Pretty fascinating. I think it's going to be a terrific game to watch. 7:30 Saturday night. Matt, really appreciate you bringing your perspective on the Irish and helping us out getting ready for this game. Miss seeing you around the office. Hope you're doing great, and really glad you're here.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Miss seeing you guys too. I haven't been in an office in 3 years, if that tells you anything.
So. Pretty close to the same here.
Yeah, no doubt.
Awesome. Matt Marshall of the Orlando Sentinel. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Be sure to subscribe to us at youtube.com/Clemson Kickoff, or follow us on your favorite podcast app. Well, with the bye week under Clemson's belts, let's go ahead and take a look position by position at how the team is grading out as far as how Daniel and I see it. Daniel, where do you want to get started?
Well, I think we got to start with quarterback, right? I mean, that's the main position in football. That's the position everybody looks at. And that's probably the most intriguing position, I think, on this Clemson team as we've made it through eight weeks of this season.
Well, I've given that position an A-. There's been 7 great games out of starter DJ Uiagalelei, maybe 6.5. It was a rough start against Georgia Tech. It's understandable. I mean, look how badly Oregon played in week 1, and now they actually have their act together. So week 1 hurdles, not uncommon in college football. Sometimes we forget that these days. But really, midway through that Georgia Tech game, Uiagalelei found a gear that we really hadn't seen from him since his freshman season.
He did, and he played really well. And I think to the point that you saw some national writers kind of apologizing to DJ for what they had written about him in the offseason, and maybe even some of the writers talking about how he should be benched. One drive into Cade Klubnik's career with the Tigers. So everything went so well for really the first 7 games. And Bill, even the first drive against Syracuse, they go right down the field. DJ has a really nice pass on early in that game, and they go right down the field and score. And you think, okay, this offense has got its stuff together. And then it just all fell off the shelf. And, why did it happen? Why did DJ play the way he played against Syracuse? The 3 turnovers. You look at that game. If he only has 2 turnovers, that game's probably not that close. If he has 1, it's really not close. So he had as many turnovers in that game as he had the first 7 weeks of the season, and those things have to get cleaned up. But I also think you can't just wipe away all the good things he had done with a quarter and a half of pretty sloppy football. I just don't think that's what you do. So I gave him a B+. I'm a little bit harder on him than you, but you also have to acknowledge all the good things that he's done through this season, even though he played really, really poorly against Syracuse.
You know, he's made some reads where he didn't always find the wide open guy here or there, and maybe it wasn't the main read. It's hard for anyone to know except for him, Brandon Streeter, Coach Sweeney, John Gross, all those guys. But yes, he's been much improved. A lot of it goes to the O-line. We'll get to that grade later. I also factored how well Cade Klubnik has played into the position unit grade. I think he's far better than any reserve that was on the team last year. I don't think he's ready for prime time, but I think if he was called upon right now, it would be more about how long would he need to round out his game rather than, oh my goodness, why do we have to turn to this guy right now?
Oh, I think so. And I don't think they win that game against Syracuse last year because they wouldn't have had Cade on the team as an option. That was a game that if that happens last year, DJ just has to finish that game out because there's nobody behind him who could have come in and done the job. And, you know, we kind of saw that at Pitt last year where DJ struggled and Tyson Pumajan came in and, you know, there were a couple of good plays and you go, oh, okay, he's going to lead a comeback. And then it all fell flat. So at least this year, Cade is on the team. And he has played well when he's played, and they have some options there if things go wrong. And then they'll have more options next year when Christopher Vizzini gets on this team as well. So I like where they are at quarterback. I think DJ's going to bounce back, and I think you're going to see him play well the rest of this season.
Pretty interesting that Christopher Vizzina's senior season of high school is already over because the team is not making the playoffs, and also the playoffs, I guess, are maybe a little early in his classification or in the state of Alabama. The other thing I wanted to mention real quick is we haven't heard a lot from the Hunters, Johnson or Helms. And I'm a fan of both guys, but that means things are going right if you're not having to turn to your third stringer or your fourth stringer in general.
Well, we talked about that in the preseason, right? Is if they play, there was going to have been something that went badly wrong. And so far we haven't seen that. And that's a good thing for this team.
All right. Well, what do you want to move on to next? Should we, since the O-line is so closely related to the quarterbacks getting good grades, you want to go there?
Definitely. Let's go there.
I think the pass protection has been outstanding. I think the run blocking finally started showing hope against Florida State, then again against an undersized Syracuse front seven. There's still some times I'm looking up and I'm not seeing a hat on a hat. I'm seeing some blown assignments. I'm seeing some false starts. But even when that doesn't happen, there's just guys in space who aren't engaging with a defender. And that's something that I would really like to see change. Not as often as we saw it last year, but definitely happening too often again this year.
I gave the offensive line a B+. I think it's been really solid. The running game is starting to come around. DJ at quarterback and even Cade when he's played some, although Cade holds the ball a little bit too long, they've had time to make their reads and have been in a clean pocket for most of the year. So I like the progression of the offensive line. I like really a lot, Bill, that the starters have been the same through the first 8 games. And we certainly didn't see that last year when they had 7 different starting groups through that season. So I really like what I'm seeing from this group, and hopefully that growth will continue through these last 4 games of the regular season.
Yeah, I give them a B-. So it's a little tougher. I would like to see the reserves coming in more. I'm very glad that the starters are staying cohesive, all working together every game. I do wish that the reserves were a little better and forcing the coaches to get them in a little more often. We have seen Mitchell Mays. We've seen some Tristan Lee. We've seen a guy here or there, but not enough. I would like to see more depth so that in a playoff game, if they're going to try to go ahead and run tempo, run 80, 85, 90 plays like they used to, you don't want those guys wearing out toward the end as much as the defense is. And I do believe that DJ Uiagalelei also has held the ball too long several times. We've seen coaches saying, well, there were a couple of sacks, but those weren't on the O-line. And I think that is reflective of how much this offensive line has improved, that DJ and Cade both think that they can hang on to the ball and wait for a receiver to work their way open if their initial routes don't get them open. That says a lot because we would not have seen that last year or probably even the year before.
Is it perfect? No. But Bill, when has Clemson had a dominant offensive line? Even in this run of success through the playoff appearances, through the national championship wins, the line hasn't been great. It's been solid. It's been good. It's gotten the job done. but it's never been a dominant, just mauling offensive line. So I don't think this group is either, but I still think there's some more out there for this group too, to continue to grow and finish strong. And look, they've got some really good running backs behind them. I know we'll talk about that in a minute. And I think they're getting the job done, and hopefully that group can continue to grow.
All right. Well, you made my mind up for me. We'll go to the running backs next, and I will just start out. I gave them an A. I think Shipley has done a solid job of turning nothing into something at times, even though he hasn't had that ETN breakaway kind of feel. He's a little more explosive than Wayne Gallman for most of Gallman's career. Shipley seems to be figuring things out a little bit. He's finding ways to be even more effective, getting a feel for beating college defenses. But then again, at times, often he's only been as good as his blocking rather than being that eraser who can kind of step up and find a large gain even where there's nothing, where guys like ETN have that knack for doing that.
Yeah, I think he looks like a different back this year, Bill. And I know last year he's a true freshman, and we forget that sometimes when these guys get on campus. But the way he's running, and he runs hard every single play. You never see him kind of loaf his way through a rep or loaf his way through a blocking responsibility. He gets the most he can out of every single play. And I think we're starting to see him grow as a back too, and what he's seeing in the hole and where to go in the hole. I love the run against Syracuse when he clinched that victory with the go-ahead score, the way he set that play up, to set up the blocking, and then boom, kicks it outside, and then he's gone down the sideline. He's doing the job and has a chance to become one of Clemson's all-time backs if he keeps this up.
Yep, just needs to learn his blocking assignments a little better. It hasn't been for lack of effort. Like you said, it's just been at times he hasn't really had that knowledge of where he really ought to be. I did ding a little bit for that because the running game, as far as the running backs are doing it, probably would earn an A+ out of me. Phil Maffa is blocking much more effectively. I love the way he runs. If he can just find that breakaway instinct, he's not going to be, second on the depth chart. That is a guy who, if he develops that sort of, again, as Sweeney calls it, the eraser ability, that chance to break away, get in the open field, pull away for a long touchdown run, I think Maffa has a higher ceiling in that regard than Shipley does. Just got to kind of piece it all together. And again, another sophomore. And both those guys missed some time in their freshman seasons with injury as well.
I love what I'm seeing from Maffa. Like I just said about Shipley, the growth from Phil Maffa from last year to this year is so noticeable. And again, I'm with you. I think he has a very high ceiling. There's a chance for him to continue to get even better. And man, he runs hard and he's tough, and he gives you a second really strong back. There's no drop off when Shipley leaves the game. So I don't know that there's two better backs in the country as a group. And man, we haven't even talked about Kobe Pace, and hopefully this team's going to get Kobe Pace back for the stretch run.
Yeah, that was another reason I bumped them up a little bit. Shipley and Maffa have basically shouldered the load on their own for several weeks now. I would love to see Pace get back in there. He's got a little bit of everything. I mean, if he were the starter this year, I don't think it would be controversial at all. He's got experience, but he's got talent to match, knows what he's doing out there, very capable, a lot of fun to watch him run with the ball. Just a three-deep group, and that's allowing the staff to go ahead and develop Keith Adams, go ahead and develop Quadzilla, work on the guys who you might need, break glass in case of emergency level of players, and turn them into something that can be more effective, the way Darian Rencher became more effective late in his career.
Yeah, those guys can give you something. There's no doubt, but you don't need them right now. And Bill, if these games are to continue to be close as well, which we've seen, Clemson's played some close games this year, you need to keep your top guys fresh and keep them in the game and on the field as much as possible. And that's why they really need to get Kobe Pace back. Hopefully he'll be healthy relatively soon, and we'll see where he goes from there. But you need to keep Maffa and Shipley healthy and keep them on the field and see what they can get done, because that combo together is something to behold. And that's why I gave them an A+. I wasn't great at math. I wasn't great in school, but I know an A+ is the best. And so far they look like the best.
Clemson has played some close games this year, maybe your biggest understatement of our 38 episodes so far. Even when the score isn't close, they're close for a while, right?
Yes, so, no doubt. Or they let it get close at the end like Florida State.
Right. Well, and that's where I get mad about some of the national evaluations of Clemson is not looking at the 60 minutes as a whole, but being more critical of the close portions than they are with a lot of other teams.
And well, to be honest, I've had people tell me who aren't Clemson fans that for some reason Clemson gets held to a higher standard than some of these other teams, and they don't understand that. And those aren't Clemson people. These are people with zero ties to the Clemson program. But you don't ding Georgia for a sloppy almost loss at Missouri, or you don't ding Alabama for its loss to Tennessee, even though Tennessee's really, really good. But what about Alabama barely beating A&M? I know that Bryce Young wasn't out, but it seems like Clemson has no room to have those kinds of close games and maybe even get a loss here or there. So, I'm not sure why that is. And again, that's not me noticing that. That's people from outside the program or outside any ties to the school. So that's why I think Clemson just kind of keep doing your thing, keep winning games, and then everything will be okay at the end of the season.
Well, maybe those people are paying more attention to the wide receivers than they are to the tight ends. So let's go into those two groups next. Let's stay with the positives. I gave the tight ends an A, and a lot of this is the learning curve of Jake Brenningstool. I don't want to underestimate what Davis Allen brings to the position group. He is its clear-cut leader. I think he is wildly underrated. I would have him as a day 2 draft pick in a perfect world. I think he's got everything you want in a tight end. But Brenningstool has taken huge steps forward as a receiver this year. He's still got some work to do on his blocking. He's just a sophomore. He's got to add a little weight. He's got to work on his technique. Only so much you can do with that in a year. But boy, find me a better 1-2 combination of tight ends in the country, and we'll sit down and have a long debate over that over a cold beverage or two.
There's some good ones at Georgia. I'll say that. Iowa typically has good tight ends. I don't know if Iowa can get the ball to those tight ends this year with their quarterback situation. But if you just said Davis Allen, I'd give him a B, right? Really good. He's a great blocker. He's done the job. But Brenningstool and his emergence, I think that lifts this group up to a, B plus at the lowest, possibly an A. I like what they've done. There haven't been a lot of drops from that group, and they've done well blocking too. So I know Brenningstool's not a great blocker, but he's been solid. And I think you're right about Davis Allen. I think Davis Allen is going to be a good pro. Man, I think Brenningstool might be even a better pro because the NFL teams a lot of times don't ask their tight ends to block. So I like what I've seen from that group. And I think that's a big key, especially on Saturday night at Notre Dame. I really believe those tight ends are going to have a big part in whether or not Clemson wins that game.
Not a lot of depth beyond those two, and I did lean maybe toward giving a slightly lower grade, although we have seen Luke Price in some key blocking situations. I would like to see Josh Sapp get some reps, but when you've got a 1-2 punch like Brenningstool and Allen, I'm not sure, much like you've said about other positions, it's hard to get your best players off the field if the games are kind of close. Well, let's move on to the receivers, and no group is getting a lower grade than the receivers on my list. I gave them a C. I love Antonio Williams and what he is showing out of the gate, and I don't want to take anything away from the success I see from him. But when the player showing the most talent is a true freshman who wasn't even an early enrollee, I think that says a lot. We have not seen growth out of Bo Collins or Joseph Ngata. We've seen good play out of both of them. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it may be that Collins is DJ's go-to guy. It sort of feels that way, that they still had that connection that they developed in high school out on the West Coast. In a few instances, they have both been standouts, but overall, the receiving core has kind of been surpassed by tight ends in some regards. Most of them have been surpassed by a true freshman who wasn't even an early enrollee. A lot of promise from Adam Randall if he can get fully healthy. I like what I've seen out of him so far, but it's hard to justify, in my mind, a really good grade when there's so little ability to be wide receiver U out of this group.
I gave him a B minus. I'm a little more positive than you, which is unusual for us. I'm usually the negative one, but I feel like there's still a chance for this group to have a good finish. And, Ngata's had some big plays. Bo Collins has had some solid play. It feels like the drops have slowed, not as bad as they were early in the season. But yes, we have to see more out of this group. If this team wants to be any kind of a championship team or a playoff team, these wide receivers have to step up. And it can't all be about Antonio Williams. It just can't. He's played great. He's had big plays. He's had solid plays. He's been good on third downs, all those things. But he's got to get some help if this group is going to take the next step.
Is there another group on this team that is farther from its potential than the wide receivers? Is that maybe why I'm skewing it toward a slightly lower grade? It's more about underperformance than poor performance?
I think so, probably. And that's okay. I mean, again, I'll give him a B minus, but it feels like this group has an A grade in it. But it's just got to get the job done. And it's got to be more consistent. It's got to be more solid. Again, I think they've had big plays, and you can't discount Antonio Williams. He counts. He's part of the group. I know that he's a true freshman, but he's there. So, but you do want to see more from Ngata. We saw the big play at BC from him. You've seen touchdowns from Bo Collins, but you want to see more from him. And then the other guys as well. Bill, am I forgetting somebody? It feels like that's the three right now who are kind of making plays, and they need more from the whole group.
Yeah, Spector's been out there, but kind of unspectacular. I would like to see more out of him. I do know they've had the injury keeping Stellato off the field. That sort of thinned things out. Dakari Collins, I had high hopes for him this year, to be honest. Had trouble getting on the field. Maybe he was in Dabo's doghouse or the love shack or whatever they want to call it, and just ran out of patience, decided to leave the program. Yeah, and then, Randall has been a little slow. I love that they are looking at Randall in key situations, and I love that defenses know they have to respect Randall's ability. They've been defending him well, so going to be interesting to see how things unfold. Maybe Brandon Streeter and Tyler Grisham can figure out some things to scheme guys open, but I feel like the passing game is going to rely pretty heavily on the guys that we've seen so far.
And what about EJ Williams? A catch here and there. I mean, after his freshman year, and I know he got hurt last year, but after his freshman year, it looked like he had a chance to jump into that top group that we've seen from Clemson, and it just has not happened for him. So, hopefully everybody gets healthy. Hopefully everybody's ready for the stretch run. It sure would be nice to get a breakout performance from Adam Randall. I think that could take this group to the next level because he has the talent. We know what he went through with the injury in the preseason. But if they could get something out of him, I think that does elevate this group and takes it to the next level.
Let's swing into special teams real quick before we head over to the defense. Special teams, I've given that an A. BT Potter has been everything he ought to be. I think he's been his most complete form of himself so far this year. I can look past a couple of missed kicks here and there. Aiden Swanson, I think, has been better than advertised. He's found the form that earned him a scholarship. It took him a while to get around to that. Coverage has been good on kickoffs and punts. They've even snuffed out a fake. I have big compliments to Mike Reed there as well.
I think special teams have been good. I would probably give them a B plus, maybe because of just a little bit of inconsistency from Aiden. Some games with maybe not great kicking in the punting team, but you also have to remember the block kicks have been great. And you said it, BT has been everything you would want out of him. There have been a couple of missed kicks, but when they've needed it, he's come through. And I think he's a weapon, and he's a security blanket that if he wasn't there, that could be a problem for this team. So love what I've seen from him, taking kind of an ownership and a spot in the leadership on this team. And he's certainly a big piece to the puzzle going through these last 4 games of the season.
The return game has been pretty sure. I feel like it's been all right. Sometimes we're hoping for a little more explosiveness, but Shipley has provided a little bit of that here and there. I would like to see a little more of that without having to lean on the offense's best player in Shipley, but not enough for me to really ding things because we've seen the punt return game be pretty sure-handed so far. And again, the occasional kickoff return keeps teams honest, respecting that.
I think so. And I think that's also a product of the game these days. I mean, how many long kickoff returns do you see? How many long punt returns do you see? They've kind of legislated the kickoff return out of the game with where they're kicking off from and all the kickoffs into the end zone. How many kickoff returns do you see in a game? There aren't many. So having Shipley back there is solid. I'm with you. I'd love for it not to have to be him because I just don't want to see him get hurt on a kickoff return. But he's been solid, and he does at least give them the chance, as we saw against Florida State, to have a long return and set up the offense with a short field. So solid, really good special teams, and excited about what that group is going to bring to the team these last 4 games.
Maybe a little bit of a segue, but remember back in the day when you'd see defensive backs back there for punt returns? Not a lot of that anymore, is there?
No, there's not. No, it's get some sure-handed guys back there, catch the ball, and then if you get anything other than that, it's kind of gravy, isn't it? I mean, you just want to catch the ball and then start your offense in a good spot and then go from there.
Let's go ahead and get into the defensive backs. And of course, independent of not being a part of the punt return game, grading them basically on what they do, I'm pretty down on them as well. I'll give them a C plus, and they have been trending up with both Sheridan Jones and Nate Wiggins healthy the last couple of weeks. A couple of dual threat quarterbacks as well, but both really liked working the ball down the field. They had trouble against Syracuse taking away Aronde Gadsden, and really, what other option was Syracuse leaning on in the past game? And maybe that's influencing me, but I think throughout the season, there's been poor coverage too often. There's been some injuries, but I really felt like there was a good 3 deep, both at cornerback and safety, and they're just not quite executing on the level that we've seen from playoff era secondaries under Mike Reed. I think this has been his most difficult position group to build into a successful unit. But he is making great strides with Wiggins and Pride in particular. You've seen Makuba out there fighting through an elbow injury. The fact that he's out there struggling to tackle maybe says something about Jalen Phillips, who I'm a big fan of. Maybe says something about RJ Mickens, that Makuba at less than 100% is still a necessity out there at safety. We've seen Tyler Venables move out of the safety position for the most part and into backing up Barrett Carter. It's been an odd mix and match, and maybe that's the reason for this, and that's why I bumped him up from a C at the last second here to a C plus.
I gave him a B minus. I'm glad we're not doing this after the Wake Forest game, because it would have been F minus 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 minus. But I give him a B minus because I do think there has been improvement since that game. Right? You go from the lowest of the low, what we saw against Wake Forest, to I think they've been solid since then. And at this point, solid is pretty darn good when you've got the defensive line and the linebacker group that this team has. So certainly would like to see some more consistency. Certainly would like to see some more big plays. We saw the interception from Mickens in the last game that sealed the deal. And there, Makuba had one right in his hands that if he catches is probably a touchdown. So you'd like to see some more turnovers, but I think there has been improvement since the Wake Forest game. So I'll give them at least the benefit of the doubt there.
Well, let's move into the linebackers. I think this is the best group of tacklers on the team. Still some work to be done there. I gave the linebackers a B plus. Without a doubt, there have been times where they have struggled identifying the proper gap, or maybe getting caught up in coverage when they ought to be staying a little closer to the line, getting fooled out of position, just not knowing their position. I don't know, but I'll tell you what, Barrett Carter has been a game changer at times. I think Trenton Simpson has been a little less visible since moving over to the will position, but I think he's doing more good there than he's doing wrong. And I think Jeremiah Trotter has earned the right to be the middle linebacker, where you've got very good options in Keith McGuire and Vontae Bentley. Bentley has made some really nice plays this year. McGuire's made some really nice plays. That depth that we talked about in the preseason is definitely showing up. They just got to rough down the edges, don't they?
Yes, definitely. The edges are rough. Let's get them cleaned up. I give them a B. And I think there's an A plus in this group, Bill. I do. And that might be my bias in this grade here, because I think there's more to this group than what we've seen. More consistency, more dynamic play. There's been solid play, really solid play, and at times terrific play. I think Trotter has been an outstanding addition to this group and played well against NC State. Barrett Carter played well against NC State. But there's also been some times where they've looked lost. Maybe they're trying to do too much. They're not doing their job. They're trying to do everybody's job. So I'd like to see a little bit more consistency and just do your job. I think this is a group that if it just does its job, this is an A-plus group. I really believe that. The athleticism, the talent, the tackling, the hitting. I love what I see from this group a lot of the times, just to need to see that on a more consistent basis.
Hard to prove this statement, but I think having both Carter and Simpson on the field at the same time is taking away a lot of options for teams. I think you're getting better coverage out of your linebacker unit with both of them on the field. And I'll give credit to Wes Goodwin. I know you've got a few things you want to levy about him, but I give him credit for putting Trotter in there because I think he's at least as good as McGuire and Bentley with a much brighter future ahead. This is going to be a season that he can build off of. And frankly, if Brent Venables was still the defensive coordinator, I don't know that we see Trotter in a starting role.
Yeah, maybe not. So I mean, if you want to give Wes Goodwin a grade for that, I give him an A+ because I think getting Trotter on the field is solid and he's not going to make a lot of mistakes. We talk about guys trying to do somebody else's job. I think that's the exact opposite of Trotter. Trotter is just doing his job and he's doing it really, really well. And if we did individual grades, I'd probably give him an A+. But it just feels like at times the group is trying to do too much. And, just be solid, just stay in your lane, just do your job. And I think this, again, like I said, is an A+ group.
Before we get into the D line, though, I know you got some things to say about Goodwin as a defensive coordinator.
Yeah, look, I like Wes, and I think he's done a solid job. But I also think at times that this group is not getting the job done. And that's surprising with as much talent as there is on this unit. We'll talk about the defensive line in a minute and our grades for them. I have really seen some struggles from this group, some inconsistency that I did not expect from this defensive line. I would have given them an A++ going into this season and not so much after 8 games. So, some of the guys, but we've got to see more consistency. But I also think that starts with the coaching staff. And it feels like at times in games there are lulls to where the scheme is not on point, the focus is not on point, the execution is not on point. And you know how I am. I don't blame the players on the college level. I blame the coaches. And that's got to start with the coaches, and they've got to be better.
The halftime adjustments have been terrific. Other than the Wake Forest game, they just had no cohesive answer there. Wake Forest seemed to figure out, all right, you're going to start taking away the pass. Well, we'll go to the slow mesh run game that we're so good at in that second half, and we're able to move that ball that way. Overall, though, it's just a matter of why can't those halftime adjustments be in-game first half adjustments? Is it coaching? Is it players? Where does the blame lie for that? Not proximate enough to the team to have the answer for that. Would like to see it get cleaned up. I know Goodwin talked about working on people with assignments and just kind of resetting things and running through some fundamentals of the game during the bye week. You hope that takes, right? You hope that sticks, and you hope the guys see, look, here's what's working. You're getting it right in the second half every week. We need 60 minutes of this. I've seen too many times where defensive ends aren't staying on the edge. I've seen too many times where Simpson tries to chip in and help make sure that a big play happens, and then the ball gets on the move and goes into the area that he just vacated. A little bit of a flashback to his freshman year. So there may be some experience factor at the new position that needs to take hold. I think Goodwin overall has done a pretty good job. And I do, however, think that there is some, again, maybe as we get into the D line, maybe I'm docking too many points for underachievement. With this defensive line, I'm giving it a B, and I am immediately following that with the statement that at their best, nobody in the country is as good at this team. They're led by Tyler Davis. He missed a little time with injury, maybe wasn't 100% all season long. But boy, the motor on him, the ability to recover when a play, maybe he's blocked out of it at one point, but then you see him at the end in there making the play at or near the line of scrimmage, often behind it. I want to see more consistency out of this group, though. I mentioned the defensive ends not always setting the edge, sometimes collapsing inside to play action or collapsing inside to first step between the guards, between the tackles. Too often, this group overall is losing contain on the ball, and they're allowing big plays. They're not owning their space and their assignment necessarily. They're trying to have a 7-yard sack every single play, and that's just a lack of discipline and maybe a lack of understanding what's really going on the field around them, not just in their space.
Well, I gave this group a B-, and it's hard for me to give a group this talented a B-, and it's hard for me to give a group with Tyler Davis in the group a B-. But I think Tyler Davis is an A+++ guy. I do. And I think Ruka Rororo has been right there with him and has been outstanding. Those two have been consistent, start to finish, every play. I don't see many mistakes from them. And again, I'm not an expert watching football film, but when I watch them play, I see them give the effort every play. Some of the other guys, it's been a really inconsistent season so far. And I know there've been injuries. I know there've been circumstances outside of the player's control. You can't ignore that. You can't deny that. But this group has to be more consistent. And I think the B-, Bill, like, have they been a B- team or a B- group? Maybe not, but have they lived up to the expectations? And I think that's where my B- comes in, because I don't think they've matched the expectations that we had for them going into this season.
I would love to have to eat these words over the next 4 weeks, hopefully the next 5 weeks straight. I'd love for them to go out and play A+ ball, because I've seen A+ form out of everyone on this team, from KJ Henry and Miles Murphy. You got Xavier Thomas coming back now. You've got Brian Brzee, hopefully putting a lot of things behind him the best he can. You've seen Aurora and Davis just absolutely lead the way from the middle. You've seen Peyton Page show ability. You've seen even DeMonte Capehart show ability. You're seeing Trey Williams find his top form again. The names just go on and on and on. I think Justin Maskell has improved this year.
Yep.
So why isn't it cohesive? Why isn't it, that ability to really limit guys, really take away options and frustrate people? I mean, being an effective D-line isn't about 4 steps and a sack. Being an effective D-line is about forcing someone into a mistake and then capitalizing when you have the ability. And I think that's one thing that we haven't seen as much this year out of this D-line as we saw out of the rest of the playoff era.
Well, again, maybe it goes back to expectations, Bill. I thought this group would dominate. I did. I thought going into this season that defensive line would dominate the other team's offensive lines pretty much the entire season. And that hasn't been the case. It wasn't the case at Wake Forest. I know we put a lot of the blame on the secondary at Wake Forest, but go back and watch that film, how easily Wake Forest moved the ball running and passing. They played well against NC State, but then they started horribly against Syracuse and started kind of shaky against Boston College. Georgia Tech was able to move the ball at times. So it may be expectations that we thought that this was going to be an all-time great group, and that has just not played out through these first 8 games. They've been good. If you said at the start of the season, you look at the stats and you didn't have any expectations for this group, you'd say, man, that defensive line is really good. But we were expecting this group to be an all-time great at Clemson. And we'll see how it finishes out. I hope I eat my words too. I want to see this group dominate these last 4 games of the regular season. And I feel like if that unit plays up to its ability, that there's not an offense that it will face that should threaten this team. But it's got to play up to that ability for that to be the reality.
Hit us up in the comments. Hit us up on social media. Tell us what you're seeing. We have conviction in our opinions, but we also don't pretend to have it all figured out. At Clemson Kickoff on Twitter or on Instagram, youtube.com/Clemson Kickoff. Your favorite podcast app, if there's an ability to comment, drop it in there. We'd love to have some back and forth. We'd love to hear what other people have to say about each group as well. Well, we'll see how they handle Notre Dame coming out of the bye week, and if they're able to improve on the things that they needed to improve on and able to maintain the strengths that they've had. We will catch up with you after that game in South Bend. Should be a barn burner. Expecting a really entertaining game out of that. And until the next episode, once that wraps up, I'm Bill Zimmerman.
I'm Daniel Shirley. Go Tigers.